The bell above the door rang softly as the man stepped into the gun shop. It was early afternoon, and the store was mostly empty. 3 young women stood behind the counter chatting, scrolling on their phones, and occasionally helping customers. When the man walked in, their conversation slowly faded. He looked ordinary. Mid-30s, worn jeans, a faded jacket that had clearly seen better days. His boots were dusty, like he'd driven a long way. In one hand he held the small hand of a little girl who looked no older than 6. The girl clutched a stuffed rabbit. The man walked quietly toward the counter. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I'm looking for a small home defense handgun." The 3 women exchanged glances. One of them, a blonde with heavy makeup and a bored expression, leaned on the counter and smirked. "Oh, really?" she said, clearly amused. "And what exactly do you plan on defending? Your tractor?" The other 2 burst into laughter. The man didn't react. He just stood there calmly. The little girl looked up at him. "Daddy, why are they laughing?" The women didn't even try to hide it now. Another girl, the brunette, leaned forward. "Let me guess," she said mockingly. "You watched a couple YouTube videos and now you think you're some kind of action hero?" More laughter. The third girl shook her head dramatically. "Honestly," she said, "people like you scare me more than actual criminals." The man finally spoke again, still calm. "I'm just trying to buy something to keep my daughter safe." That made them laugh even harder. The blonde rolled her eyes. "Sir, do you even know how to handle a firearm?" The man didn't answer. He simply looked at the glass display. Inside were several pistols. He pointed politely. "That one looks reliable." The brunette snorted. "Oh my God." She turned to the others. "He thinks reliability is about how it looks." More laughter. The little girl squeezed her father's hand tighter. "Daddy, can we go somewhere else?" The man gently squeezed her hand back. "It's okay," he said quietly. But the humiliation wasn't over. The blonde leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound insulting. "Look," she said, "maybe try a toy store. Might be more your level." The 3 girls burst into laughter again. For a moment the entire store was filled with the sound of it, but then the front door opened again. The bell rang. A heavy silence followed immediately, because the man who just walked in wasn't laughing. He was the owner, a tall older man in his late 50s, with a serious face and the kind of quiet authority that made people stand up straight without thinking. He took one look at the scene, the laughing girls, the quiet father, the small child holding a stuffed rabbit. His expression changed instantly. He walked straight toward the man. The girls expected him to join the joke. Instead, the owner stopped in front of the father. Then he did something none of them expected. He straightened his posture and spoke with deep respect. "Sir," the entire room went silent. "It's an honor to have you here." The 3 girls froze. The father looked up slowly, and for the first time, there was something in his eyes, something the girls had completely missed. The owner continued quietly, "I didn't know you were back in town." Now the girls were staring in confusion. Back in town? Who exactly was this man? And why was the owner suddenly treating him like someone important? The father sighed softly. "I was hoping to keep things quiet." The owner shook his head slightly. "Not after what you did for this country." The girls felt their stomachs drop. They looked at each other, then back at the quiet man they had just humiliated, and suddenly, none of them were laughing anymore. The laughter had completely vanished. The 3 girls stood frozen behind the counter, their earlier confidence draining from their faces. Just a minute ago they had been joking, mocking, acting like the man in front of them was nothing more than a clueless customer. Now the owner of the store was standing straight in front of him, like he was greeting someone important, very important. The blonde girl cleared her throat awkwardly. "Mr. Harris," she said carefully, "you know him?" The owner slowly turned his head toward the counter. His eyes were sharp now, disappointed. "Know him?" he repeated. Then he looked back at the quiet father. "Sergeant Daniel Carter." The name hung in the air like a sudden thunderclap. None of the girls recognized it immediately, but the tone in the owner's voice made it clear this wasn't just some random introduction. The little girl looked up at her father. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" Daniel gently shook his head. "No, sweetheart. Everything's fine." But behind the counter, the girls were starting to feel something heavy settling in their stomachs. The owner looked at them again. "You three have been working here for almost a year," he said slowly, "and not once did you bother to learn the history hanging on these walls." He pointed toward a framed newspaper article on the wall near the entrance. "Go read it." The brunette hesitated before walking over. The other two followed. Their footsteps felt strangely loud in the quiet store. They stopped in front of the frame. Inside it was an old newspaper clipping. At the top was a headline: "Local soldier saves 5 during ambush, refuses medal." Under the headline was a photo, a younger version of the same quiet man standing in their shop, but the story below it made their blood run cold. During a military convoy attack overseas, Sergeant Daniel Carter had pulled 5 wounded soldiers out of a burning armored vehicle while enemy fire rained down around them. One of those soldiers was the store owner's son. The brunette slowly turned around. Her face had completely lost its color. You're that Carter?" Daniel shifted slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "I was just doing my job." The owner shook his head. "No, son, you did more than that." The blonde girl felt her chest tighten. Just minutes ago, she had asked if he even knew how to handle a firearm. She had laughed at him, mocked him, humiliated him, and all he had done in response was stay calm. The little girl tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy, can we go home now?" Daniel looked down at her soft voice and gave a small nod. "We will in a minute." But before he could say anything else, the owner turned back toward the 3 employees. His voice was colder now. "You girls owe this man more than an apology." None of them could even look Daniel in the eye. And for the first time since he walked in, the power in the room had completely shifted. Before we continue the story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you ever loved someone with your pure heart so, subscribe to this channel so you never miss the best stories. The air inside the shop felt heavy. The 3 employees stood near the wall, unable to look at Daniel Carter. Just minutes ago, they had laughed at him like he was some clueless guy who didn't belong there. Now they knew the truth, and it made their earlier behavior feel 10 times worse. The owner, Mr. Harris, walked back behind the counter and unlocked the glass case. He spoke in a much softer tone now. "So, what brings you here, Daniel?" Daniel hesitated for a moment. He didn't seem like a man who enjoyed talking about his problems. His eyes briefly moved toward his daughter, who was now sitting on a stool, quietly hugging her stuffed rabbit. Finally, he sighed. "I wasn't planning on telling anyone," he said. Mr. Harris frowned slightly. "That's serious?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah." The 3 girls slowly moved closer again, but this time they were silent. No smirks, no jokes, just uncomfortable curiosity. Daniel rested his hands on the counter. "I moved back into my old house last month," he explained, "trying to start over. New job, new routine for Lily." He glanced toward his daughter again. But then his voice hardened. 3 nights ago, someone broke into the house." The words immediately changed the mood in the room. Mr. Harris straightened. "They hurt you?" "No," Daniel replied. "But they weren't there to steal." That made everyone pause. The brunette spoke quietly. "What do you mean?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "They were looking for something." Mr. Harris's expression turned serious. "What kind of something?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "That's a problem. I don't know." He leaned forward slightly, but they left a message. Now the room was completely silent. "What message?" Mr. Harris asked. Daniel pulled something from his jacket pocket. It was a small folded piece of paper. He placed it on the counter. Mr. Harris opened it carefully. His eyes narrowed immediately. "What the hell?" The blonde girl nervously asked. "What does it say?" Mr. Harris slowly read it out loud. You should have died overseas. This time we finished the job. A cold chill spread through the shop. The little girl looked up confused. Daddy, what does that mean? Daniel quickly folded the paper again. It means nothing, sweetheart. But the adults in the room knew that wasn't true. Someone out there hated him enough to break into his home and leave a threat. Mr. Harris closed the display case with a sharp click. You're not leaving here without protection. Daniel nodded slightly. That's why I came. The three girls looked at each other uneasily. Moments ago they had mocked him for wanting a gun. Now they realized he wasn't buying it out of fear. He was buying it because someone dangerous had already come for him, and maybe they weren't done yet. No one in the shop spoke for a few seconds. The message Daniel had shown them still hung in the air like a dark cloud. Mr. Harris carefully placed the note back on the counter. This isn't a joke, he said firmly. Someone's targeting you. Daniel gave a small nod. I figured. The owner opened the display case again and took out a compact handgun. Reliable, easy to handle. Good for home defense, he said, placing it gently on the counter. Daniel looked at it calmly. Looks good. Behind the counter, the three girls stood quietly, completely different from the confident people they had been earlier. Finally, the blonde girl took a small step forward. Her voice was awkward. Sir, She stopped, clearly struggling to say the words. The brunette nudged her slightly. Just say it. The blonde took a breath. I'm sorry. Daniel looked at her. Not angry, not smug, just tired. We shouldn't have laughed, she continued. We didn't know who you were. Daniel's expression didn't change. That's kind of the point, he said calmly. The words hit harder than yelling would have. The girls lowered their eyes. You shouldn't treat anyone like that, Daniel added quietly. The brunette nodded. You're right. Mr. Harris crossed his arms, watching the moment carefully. But before anyone could say anything else, the shop door suddenly slammed open. The bell above it rang loudly. Everyone turned. A tall man stepped inside, dark jacket, baseball cap pulled low. His eyes moved quickly around the room, and then they stopped on Daniel. For a split second, something dangerous flashed across his face. Daniel noticed immediately. Years of military instinct kicked in. He slowly moved his body slightly in front of Lily. The man smirked. Well, look who it is. The tension in the room shot up instantly. Mr. Harris stepped forward. Can I help you? But the man ignored him. His eyes stayed locked on Daniel. You didn't stay gone very long, Carter. The three girls felt a chill run through them. Daniel's voice was calm. Do I know you? The man chuckled darkly. Oh, you will. His hand moved slightly inside his jacket. Mr. Harris immediately shouted, Hey! But Daniel had already seen it coming. In one smooth motion, he pushed Lily behind him and grabbed the handgun from the counter. The entire store froze. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. The stranger slowly raised both hands, but he was still smiling. You're fast, he said quietly. Daniel's voice was cold now. Who sent you? The man tilted his head. You'll find out soon enough. Then he slowly backed toward the door, and before anyone could stop him, he walked out. The bell rang again. Silence returned, but this time, everyone in the room understood something terrifying. The threat against Daniel Carter was real, and it had just walked through the front door. The shop stayed silent long after the stranger left. The door slowly swung shut behind him, the bell giving one last quiet ring. Daniel didn't lower the handgun right away. His eyes stayed locked on the door, every muscle in his body tense. Only after several seconds did he slowly place the weapon back on the counter. Lily peeked out from behind him. Daddy, was that a bad man? Daniel knelt down in front of her. His voice softened instantly. Yeah, he said gently. But he's gone now. She nodded, trusting him completely, and hugged her stuffed rabbit tighter. Mr. Harris locked the front door and pulled the blinds halfway down. No more customers today, he muttered. The three employees stood close together, clearly shaken. The blonde girl looked pale. That guy, he knew you, she said quietly. Daniel stood up again. Apparently. Mr. Harris crossed his arms. You're not telling us everything, are you? Daniel hesitated. The look on his face made it clear he had hoped to avoid this conversation. But after what had just happened, there was no point hiding it anymore. He exhaled slowly. 6 years ago, he began, my unit was sent on a convoy mission overseas. Mr. Harris already knew part of the story, but he stayed quiet. Daniel continued. We were transporting something important. The brunette frowned. What kind of something? Daniel looked directly at her. Evidence. The word confused them. Evidence of what? The blonde asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. Illegal weapons deals. Now everyone was listening carefully. There were people in our own government secretly selling military weapons to criminal groups overseas, Daniel explained. Mr. Harris looked shocked. Are you serious? Daniel nodded. My team accidentally discovered documents proving it. The room felt colder. What happened to the people involved? The brunette asked. Daniel gave a humorless smile. Some of them went to prison. He paused, but not all of them. The meaning hit instantly. They blame you, the blonde whispered. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Mr. Harris ran a hand across his face. So someone powerful still wants you gone. Looks that way, Daniel replied. The youngest employee, who had been quiet the entire time, finally spoke. But why now? Daniel glanced toward Lily. Because they finally figured out where I moved. The three girls looked at the little girl sitting quietly with her rabbit, and suddenly the whole situation felt even worse. This wasn't just about revenge. A child was involved. Mr. Harris shook his head. You're not handling this alone. Daniel frowned slightly. I don't want anyone else dragged into it. The brunette stepped forward unexpectedly. Too late. Daniel looked at her. Her voice was serious now. We already are, for the first time since this all started. Daniel realized something. The people who had laughed at him earlier were now standing beside him. And whatever was coming next, it wasn't over. The tension in the shop hadn't faded. Mr. Harris sat behind the counter, checking the locks on the doors again, while Daniel carefully inspected the handgun he was about to purchase. His movements were calm, controlled, like a man used to dealing with dangerous situations. But the three girls stood quietly near the shelves, clearly thinking about everything that had just happened. Finally, the brunette spoke. You can't go back home tonight. Daniel looked up. I don't really have another option. Yes, you do, Mr. Harris said firmly. You and Lily can stay at my place for a few days. Daniel shook his head slightly. I appreciate it, but I don't want to drag anyone else into this mess. The blonde crossed her arms. You're not dragging us anywhere, she said. Those people already found you here. Daniel didn't argue with that, because she wasn't wrong. Lily quietly swung her legs on the stool, unaware of the full danger around her. But someone else in the room looked more nervous than the rest. The youngest employee. Her name was Emily. She had barely spoken since the stranger walked in. Now she kept glancing toward the door like she expected someone else to walk through it. Daniel noticed. His instincts picked up on things most people missed. He studied her carefully. You okay? He asked. Emily flinched slightly. Yeah, I'm fine. But her voice wasn't convincing. The brunette noticed it too. Emily? Emily swallowed hard. There's something I need to say. Everyone turned toward her. She hesitated, clearly struggling. Then the words finally came out. That man who walked in earlier. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. What about him? Emily looked down at the floor. I've seen him before. The entire room went still. Where? Mr. Harris asked. Emily took a shaky breath. 2 days ago. Daniel stepped closer. Where did you see him? Her voice dropped, almost to a whisper. Outside your house. Daniel's face changed instantly. You're sure? She nodded slowly. I was driving home from work that night. I took a shortcut through Maple Street. That was the street where Daniel lived. I saw a black SUV parked near the corner, she continued. The same man was standing beside it, watching your house. The blonde felt a chill run through her. So they've been watching him for days. Emily nodded again. But that's not the worst part. Daniel's voice became colder. What do you mean? Emily finally looked up at him. Her eyes were filled with guilt. Because I didn't just see him. She paused. I saw 3 other men with him. The room felt smaller suddenly. 4 men, watching Daniel's home, watching his daughter. Mr. Harris slammed his hand on the counter. Damn it. Daniel slowly turned toward the window. His mind was already moving, calculating, because now one thing was very clear. This wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a plan. And somewhere out there, 4 dangerous men were preparing to finish what they started. The sun had already started going down when Daniel finally left the shop. Mr. Harris insisted on closing early. The blinds stayed down and the door stayed locked until Daniel finished preparing. He bought the handgun, 2 magazines, and a small safe for his house. Mr. Harris refused to charge him for half of it. You already paid enough for this country, the old man said. The 3 girls stood nearby, still uneasy after everything Emily had revealed. 4 men watching his house, planning something. Daniel knelt in front of Lily again before leaving. Sweetheart, we're going home, okay? She nodded sleepily, still hugging her rabbit. Okay, Daddy. Mr. Harris placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. You sure you don't want to stay at my place tonight? Daniel shook his head. If they're watching my house, running away won't stop them. The owner looked worried but didn't argue. Sometimes a man like Daniel had already made up his mind. The drive home was quiet. The streetlights had just started turning on when Daniel pulled his truck into the driveway. The house looked normal. Too normal. His instincts immediately tightened. He stepped out of the truck and scanned the street. Empty road, quiet houses. But something felt wrong. Lily, he said calmly, stay in the truck for a second. Okay. Daniel slowly walked toward the front door. His eyes moved across the yard, the windows, the shadows. Then he saw it, the back gate. It was slightly open. Daniel's jaw tightened. He hadn't left it like that. His hand slowly moved to the handgun inside his jacket. Years of training took over instantly. He walked back to the truck. Lily, lock the doors, he said gently. Daddy needs to check something. Her eyes grew a little worried. Are you coming back? Of course. She nodded and pressed the lock button. Daniel quietly moved around the side of the house. Every step was silent, every movement careful. As he reached the backyard, he heard it. A voice, low, whispering, check inside. He should be home by now. Daniel's blood ran cold. They were already here. He carefully peeked around the corner of the fence. 2 men stood near the back door, another one near the window, and across the yard. The same man from the gun shop, the one who had smiled earlier. Daniel's grip tightened on the handgun. 4 men, just like Emily said. The leader spoke again. Boss wants him alive at first, he said quietly. But if he fights... He shrugged. End it. Daniel slowly exhaled. They had come to his home, near his daughter. That was their mistake. Because the calm, quiet father they had seen earlier was also a soldier who survived things they couldn't imagine. And tonight, they were about to learn exactly who Daniel Carter really was. The backyard was quiet, except for the low voices of the 4 men. They were confident, too confident. They thought they were hunting a scared single father. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. Daniel stepped out from the shadow of the fence. His voice was calm but firm. You shouldn't be here. All 4 men spun around instantly. The leader smirked when he saw him. Well, look who decided to show up. The other 3 slowly spread out across the yard, trying to corner him. But Daniel didn't move. He stood his ground. You've been watching my house, Daniel said. Now you're on my property. The leader shrugged. Boss wants to talk. Daniel gave a cold smile. Funny way to ask for a conversation. The man chuckled. You ruined a lot of important people when you handed over those documents 6 years ago. So Daniel had been right. This was revenge. Some of those people lost millions, the man continued. Some lost their careers. He tilted his head slightly. And some of them want you buried. Daniel's eyes stayed steady. You could have left it alone, the man added. But heroes always make things difficult. Daniel slowly raised the handgun. You're not touching my daughter. The leader sighed. I was hoping you'd cooperate. Then suddenly he pulled a weapon, but Daniel had already moved. A sharp crack split the night. The gunshot echoed across the quiet street. The leader dropped instantly, his weapon falling to the grass. The other three froze. Daniel's voice turned ice cold. Next one who reaches for a gun doesn't get a warning. For the first time, fear appeared in their faces. They had expected an easy target, not a trained soldier, not a man protecting his child. One of them slowly raised his hands. All right. The other two quickly followed. Sirens began wailing in the distance. Mr. Harris had called the police the moment Daniel left the shop. The men looked at each other nervously. Their plan had completely collapsed. Daniel lowered the gun slightly but kept his eyes locked on them. You picked the wrong house, he said quietly. Minutes later, police cars filled the street. The attackers were arrested. The threat was over. Later that night, Lily hugged her father tightly inside the house. You kept me safe, she said softly. Daniel kissed her forehead. Always. Across town, the three girls from the shop heard the news, and none of them would ever forget the man they laughed at that day. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room carries the heaviest story. Never judge someone by their appearance, their clothes, or their quiet nature. You never know what battles a person has fought or what strength they carry inside. From this story, we learn that respect should be given to everyone, because behind an ordinary face may be a hero, a survivor, or someone protecting the people they love the most. And the greatest strength of all is a person who stays calm, protects their family, and stands up when it truly matters.